Welcome to another episode of Fragrantica Talks. My name is Adam Forziati, and I'm lucky to be joined today by Nicola Thomas once again. We wanted to do this episode about how to wear perfume and just a little bit of like the basics, for lack of a better term, because, you know, there are lots of folks out there who might be newer to Fragrantica, but there are also just people who like to hear opinions about these types of topics, these kind of core topics. So, Nicola, right off the bat, who do you think we ought to sort of include in our scope of discussion, and where should we go today?
Well, like all our chats, I like to feel like they're for everybody in the fragrance world, but particularly people who are new to fragrance, whether that's designer, whether it's niche, but people who want to understand and learn some of the basics of fragrance wearing, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And also, I think we should try and answer some of those questions that people might feel they're embarrassed to ask. How should I apply it? How should I store it? Those sorts of things that we don't always talk about because we take them for granted once you've been immersed in it for a while. And actually, it's really good. It's a really good opportunity to bring those things up and air them, as it were. So let's talk about it. And also, let's invite listeners to leave their comments, their top tips for perfume wearing, selecting, and application down in the comments.
Yeah, I like your term "air" these issues out a little bit, because it is probably important to say that these are our opinions, and it's not to say that they are the number one opinions. But they're based on our own experience and our own discussions with other people who are even more experienced than us with fragrance. So let's just hope that everybody takes it in good faith and that they don't necessarily reflect the ultimate Fragrantica view, which there really isn't. So we're going to talk today about buying perfume, about applying it, about storing it, and about choosing fragrances. So maybe let's start off a little bit more general. Do you have maybe one kind of ultimate or general tip for those who are just getting into niche or just getting into fragrance in general?
I think the biggest thing for me is to store your perfumes properly, to make sure that they're kept away from the light. Sorry, I've got a little helper here today. This is Pudding, the Labrador, who just likes to cuddle a little bit too much. So you get down, good girl. Good girl.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have a little visitor, I'm sure, at some point too. You can see right under the mic there, as you were.
Yeah. So what Pudding really feels passionate about is telling you that you should always store your perfumes in a cupboard away from the light. Definitely, once they're open, keep them in the box so that the light can't get to them. Better still, keep them in a cupboard.
Really passionate about this topic in particular.
She's really passionate about it. Get down, Pudding, get down. Good girl.
We're really humanizing the face of Fragrantica right now. Yeah.
Like animal chaos. So what you'll see if you watch a lot of influencer videos is influencers, and they've got racks and racks, walls and walls of fragrance that are all out of their boxes, that are all under really harsh lighting. And that's absolutely the worst thing you can do to keep your collection pristine and smelling fresh and smelling amazing. What you want to do is keep it dark, keep it temperate, not too hot, not too cool. I have heard of people storing it in the fridge because it's dark and cold. And what you want to avoid is accelerating the evaporation process, accelerating the top notes, dissipating, and the darker and kind of more temperate that you can keep the fragrance, the longer it will last. And for many scents, they'll last years if you keep them dark and cool. And learning that really changed how I store my fragrance. And now I keep it all in a cupboard, or in a couple of cupboards actually, just to make sure the light's not going to get to it. So that's my top tip, is store it properly and it'll last for a lot longer.
Quickly adding on to that, yeah, I do also watch some YouTube videos where they have all their fragrances in the background, and I'm just thinking to myself, that's Rule number one, broken, right? And we say
Yeah.
rule lightly, of course. I mean, you can do what you want, especially if
Yeah.
you're going through fragrances quickly. But the moment that you start to have 10 or 20 bottles of something, I mean, how quickly are you actually going through it to prevent,
Mm.
long-term, uh, dissolution or degradation of the perfume's quality? So
Yes.
that's definitely a great tip, Nicola. I would say that, just to say what I do a similar thing where try to keep it away from light, but also balancing its accessibility. My
Mm.
solution is I have this old roll top desk, which, good luck finding them at an affordable price. I just happen to have this one from when I was a kid in my house, and my mom let me take it. So that was, very nice. Uh, but yeah, if you can find one, maybe an old one that's kind of beaten up a little bit at a decent price, just put a stain on it if you really care about that. And you have yourself an excellent fragrance storage solution because you just roll it up and it's right there and you can pick from top down. So it's very accessible. And then you just close it when you're done and it's away from
Mm.
any critters like this one who might want to jump up and knock it down. So I love that. It's a protection from light and other things, and it's a very easy solution. So yeah,
Mm.
that's definitely a great tip.
I
Um,
love that as a solution. I like really like the idea of a roll top desk. That's a really nice idea.
Classes up the joint too, I will
Yeah,
admit. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. So, what's your top tip for us?
I'd say this might sound a little general, but I think my number one bit of advice is just to spend time with fragrances. I can't tell you how many times that I've come around to something, and that might depend on your personality. If you're a type of person who is very kind of like black or white, and you know that you're like little type A, and you know what your place is, you know what your desires are, and you go for them, you know, it's great to be that way too. And knowing what you like is important. But I would say don't look at fragrances black and white. And when you don't look at it in an extreme this or that kind of way, you tend to realize that spending time with samples, especially, but even once you buy a bottle of something, if you don't think it was sort of as magical as it was when you first sampled it, consider the circumstances during which you sampled it. Were you having a really good time when you sampled it? Were you particularly happy that day or that week? And if you are in a situation where you think you want to buy something, maybe hold off, sample it for a while, spend some time with the sample, or vice versa. If you buy a bottle of something and you don't enjoy it, give it some time, wear it in different situations, wear it in different temperatures. That's pretty critical. And wear it when you're in different frames of mind, because sometimes things sort of hit you. And that's sort of the fun and sort of, quote unquote, the magic, but there are scientific reasons for it. The magic of fragrance is that, you can experience it differently over time and in different moods, just like you can experience certain foods differently over time. And just like you
Mm.
develop a palate and develop an understanding and a desire for certain foods, I think the same is true for fragrance. So spending
Yeah.
time on either end of the buying process or just the exploration process is
Mm.
my number one tip.
Yeah. And I think if anybody's watching this video that is coming to this new and fresh, that tip will save you money. If you sample something, rather than buying, if you smell it for the first time in the shop and go, wow, that's amazing, I'm going to buy it. If you can slow down, sample it first instead, I guarantee that will save you money, because what happens to a lot of people, and I include myself in this, is I got overexcited at the beginning. It's not that easy to walk into stores in the UK where you can try lots of niche fragrance. They're few and far between, and they're mostly concentrated in London. Or I would go on holiday to Europe where they're much more prevalent. I'd walk into a shop, I'd smell something, I'd think, oh my God, that's amazing. Must buy it. I'd kind of, shoot the bolt too early. I'd wear it 2 or 3 times. I think, I don't actually really like this. And it's really disappointing when that happens, not to mention, economically wasteful. So I've learned now to slow down, and I always sample before I buy. And so I think that's a really good tip, because I think, yeah, if you're starting out, and also if budgetary constraints are an issue, like they are for, let's face it, probably 99% of people who are into fragrance, sampling, slowing, sampling and slow buying will save you money. 100%
Absolutely.
guarantee.
The hobby rewards patience in all aspects.
Mm.
I think those who probably feel most fulfilled by the hobby might also potentially be people who have a little bit more patience. Um, it certainly rewards that attribute, and something that I think people who are either new to the scene or have been here a while might agree on is the prevalence of people who say, maybe on social media or in forums or in comments and that kind of thing, the prevalence of people who say things like, I can't smell the individual notes, and they're saying, like, I'm not as good at this as somebody else might be. And I don't think that you need to be good at it. I just think you need to spend time with it. I think you need just like anything else. I mean, you'll probably be able to appreciate something more the more that you experiment with it and spend time with it and study it. It really isn't rocket science, but I feel bad when I see people, maybe doing a little bit of that self-degradation thing. Like, there's no need for that. You don't you if you want to be good at it, quote unquote, in that way, time and patience will reward you. But if you don't want to be good at it in that way and you still enjoy the hobby in some other way, that's also fine. And spending time with fragrances will still suit you just fine.
Yeah. I think we've touched on this before, but it's about joy, isn't it? A lot of fragrance is about joy. It's about bringing a little bit of joy to your everyday, to the office, to the commute, to the sitting watching TV. Fragrance just gives you a little happy. And so it's about finding for you whatever gives you that little happy, whether that's a mass market fragrance, whether it's a hyper niche, it doesn't matter. What matters is the ritual of self-care, not to sound too, new age, knit your own yogurt type thing about it, but it is the ritual of self-care that spraying some perfume, it's looking after yourself. And I think at the moment, with all the tumultuous things that are going on in the world, actually a lot of us, if we can do those little moments of self-care, then I would encourage us to, because I think we need it. People do need it. I need it. Just as a little, just makes my day a little bit better, brings me a little bit of joy. And so if a fragrance can do that for you, then go for it, but don't go for it to the point where you're not enjoying it, to the point where you're not getting that satisfaction and excitement out of it anymore, because that's when you need to pull back a little bit.
So, like we said at the start, we're going to talk about buying fragrance. So let's maybe think about how you would go about that. What are some tips that you have for those who are looking to actually purchase a bottle of something?
So this is a tip that is maybe going to be hard to hear, but when I'm seriously shopping for a fragrance to bring me some joy, shop alone. Now, it's even quite hard to say that, because I'm somebody that enjoys shopping with friends as a social activity. We'll pop into town, we'll have a coffee, we'll maybe go to a perfume shop and smell some things. But if you're looking to buy something that really sets you on fire, you need to do it on your own, because there is nothing worse. And this has happened to me so many times, of me going, oh, this is amazing, holding it out to a friend or a partner, and they go, oh, that's gross. And it kills the joy, that excitement that you get, that rush that you get from smelling something that's unusual, that's exciting, that you really like. Somebody else then dismisses it in a heartbeat without even really giving it a proper sniff or giving it a proper wearing, and that little bit of excitement that you felt is killed. So I would always say shop alone. I think that's particularly true if you're looking to buy a fragrance for your wedding, if you're looking to buy a fragrance for a big event, for some big moment in your life. If you're gonna mark that with a fragrance, it's all the more important to shop alone, so that you're getting that sense of it being something that really sparks joy for you. and you're not getting too clouded by other people's opinions, because I think they can be quite loud. You know, if you're a floral person and the friend that you're shopping with is like, oh my God, we must have citruses. I love citruses and citrus. You suddenly get sucked into that when actually what makes your heart sing is something in a different sort of family altogether. So yeah, that's, and when I'm trying to buy a fragrance that is going to be something special, or I'm looking for something special, I do try and shop on my own, and I turn it into kind of a meditative or contemplative sort of experience. You know, it's about noticing how that scent makes me feel. Does it make me feel happy? Does it make me feel sad? Do I feel excited? Do I feel bored? And really paying attention to that internal world that's going on while you're experiencing the fragrance, so that you're tuning into yourself. Again, oh God, I sound so new agey this week. I don't know what's happened to me. But
would you like some granola with that?
I'm all about the self-care this week. We should embrace it. And yeah, so sort of listening to how you feel, and going with that rather than getting sucked up in other people's judgments of the scent that you love. So yeah, it is something I do try and do myself. So yeah, what about you? How do you buy a fragrance?
Well, it might not be about how I buy it specifically, but it's something that I do. I do try to avoid, and this is especially relevant for those getting into niche and independent work. You know, you'll see sometimes sales of fragrances on like the gray market, people selling them in groups and things, and they will be well over the asking price if it's like one of these big deal independent or niche houses that are, you know, have a big cult following. And yeah, I could name several. I won't right now. I think everybody knows some of them at least. And so you'll see people selling their bottles that they bought and they didn't end up liking, and they want to get their money back on it. But instead of asking for what they paid or maybe a little bit over, which I could still maybe understand, they ask for, you know, 60 to 80 or more over what they paid for the bottle. And my buying advice would be, don't give them the business. I think we should do a better job as a community calling out this behavior, because it's insulting and taking business away from the creators and the businesses behind the fragrances themselves. It's insulting and taking business away and making life a little bit less fair for people who just wanted to be able to try something in the first place, but due to popular demand, maybe bottles or samples sold out quicker than they could get them. So it's really not a very nice thing to do. And it's also just, it makes kind of like an unintended, I think, but an interesting like gatekeeping effect. You know, if people are buying these kind of niche, in demand, cult following bottles up, all of them at a time, and selling out the house, that's initially good for the house, but then it kind of brings the house down a little bit, brings the collective mood on that house down a little bit. If then the only option you have to try their work is to be, you know, completely screwed over by really high prices for either partial bottles or samples. So yes, finding splits of bottles can be a nice thing. Finding decants of bottles, if you don't have a ton of money to spend and you want to get to know houses that are a little bit more in demand or a little bit more like niche or cult following, and you want to try them, sometimes getting splits and decants of bottles can be the way to go. But
let's just, sorry to interrupt you there. Let's just define for people the difference between a split and a decant. If you will.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, most of the time, I guess there really isn't a huge difference. What I mean is just like, if you find somebody who has decided to purchase as many bottles as they could of a house, or maybe just one bottle, if it's like a one per person only situation. And what they do is they buy the bottle at regular price, but then they sell off little decants that they make of the bottle to kind of recoup their own costs, and also give other people the chance to try something, because this is especially useful when we're talking about a house that, again, has that cult following, and when they put up something new on their site, it goes like that. So, you know, a split is the act of doing that, the act of buying a bottle and then, splitting it up into decants and keeping a partial of the bottle yourself and selling off the rest. And a decant is the act of buying that piece. So yeah, I recommend if it's one of those houses like a Slumber House, like a Rives Lador, like a Bortnikov. I'm sure there are tons of others, but those are the first ones that come to mind. And you want to get to know them, and you missed out on the samples. Obviously, try to buy from the house first. But if you missed out on samples from the house directly, doing a split can be a really great thing. But again, I hope for the sake of the community that we can avoid, giving too much credit to those who buy a bottle or two of something that's scarce and in demand and then sell it for well over what they paid for it.
Yeah. Do you think there's a little bit of a difference between our respective countries here as well? Because the grey market in the UK is actually quite good at self-policing, and certainly the groups that I'm aware of, and I'm talking about groups on things like Facebook here, they're quite good at self-policing and will throw people out for profiteering. It becomes a bit murky when people buy testers for selling on, because you're paying well under the RRP anyway for that. So it's not always clear how much somebody would have paid for that tester bottle. So whether they're making a profit off that or not, it's really difficult to tell. And then also with vintages, if you're buying something that's 20, 30 years old, you can't be expected to pay £2.60 that it cost then, because obviously it's gone up in value, it's much more desirable now. But what people tend to do in those cases is they'll take a benchmark of what things have sold for on eBay, what they've seen things go for in the groups, and try and price accordingly. I've seen numerous people get called out for profiteering, and I've even seen people be thrown off groups for buying something cheap and then trying to sell it on expensively, which is really good. And I think we need more of that, definitely. The other thing to say is, on the subject of decanting, it's really tricky because technically in the UK it's illegal to sell, to buy a bottle of perfume and to then sell off 5 or 10 mil things of that. And that is because when you buy a perfume, it's at a certain concentration, it's labeled with ingredients and allergens. Then when it's decanted, all that stuff gets lost. There's the danger that the person doing the decanting is watering it down potentially, and all that sort of thing. So actually decanting it's not totally sort of legal. I say it's illegal, but I don't know that many people are actually going to come after you for it. Maybe if you're selling Chanel decants or other, huge house, you may find yourself in more hot water than if you're selling decants from a small indie house. So I just ask people to bear that in mind. It goes on a lot, tremendously, and I can totally understand why people do it, because if samples are hard to come by, or if you can't afford to get samples shipped, if you're trying to sample a house that is across the other side of the world, and particularly in the UK with shipping costs being so high to get here, I completely understand why people think, well, actually what I might as well do is buy a full bottle, decant some of it, keep half of it, and make my money back that way. I get it, I really do. It is the problem of the hobby, really. But just bear that in mind, that you might want to be careful about where you buy things from. You might want to check whether you trust that person isn't watering down the fragrances. You might want to, I think the ideal would be to check with the house first to make sure they aren't selling samples, because at least you're getting something legitimate then, and you're not going to get ripped off. But I understand that isn't always the case. So it is a bit of a murky area. So navigate it very carefully if you do decide you want to go down that route. That would just be my advice on that.
No, absolutely. I think the way I spoke about it was talking a little bit about seller responsibility, like try to avoid being one of those people who, profiteers.
Yeah.
We don't have as many restrictions on that here in the United States, and I really kind of wish we did, if I'm honest. There's also a bit to say about buyer responsibility as well. You know, again, always try to buy from the house itself where possible and where you're financially able. It's almost like buying local. If you're keeping money in a certain community, that community benefits. And, you know, this is just a really generalized statement, but I think it's kind of worthy of note, is that something we see people complaining a lot about is reformulations. And yeah, sometimes houses reformulate something because they figure out a way to do it cheaper. That definitely happens. But I think most of the time reformulations happen more so because of material costs, materials changing in quality, and because certain things are bought more than others. And, you know, a company wants to succeed. And if they want to succeed, generally speaking, they have to follow what their customers do. So, you know, there is sort of somewhat of a customer responsibility in all of this as well. And it's best just to look at your fragrance buying habits as, what would a nice person in this community do? You know, don't expect something that a house can't follow through on. Don't complain about sample availability or reformulations or something else that's on the responsibility of the seller, but then be a buyer who always avoids buying from the seller directly. You know, it's common sense. It sounds like almost, I don't want to sound like we're condescending to anybody. It's just, this is important, and, you know, try to be a nice person about it. Try to be a considerate person.
Yeah, and I think on the subject of reformulations, what people might not realize, who are kind of coming into the scene, is that things do get reformulated often. I don't think we could give you an accurate timescale as to how that happens. Sometimes it happens overnight. You know, it can happen very quickly. Sometimes things get reformulated over years. Brands don't have to tell you when something's reformulated either, and they often won't. A favorite fragrance of mine, Body by Victoria's Secret, could only get it in America at the time. Victoria's Secret has since made it to the UK, but smelled it in America, loved it, bought it, brought it home, you know, romped my way through a whole bottle, went back to America, smelled it again, totally reformulated. And I did some research on it, couldn't find anywhere that said that it had been reformulated, but it clearly had, because it smelled totally different to my nose. So on the subject of reformulations, if you find a signature scent, if you love it, buy 2 bottles. You know, it doesn't have to be the week after, but if that is something that you think you are going to want in your collection for a long time, buy 2 bottles. And I wouldn't say necessarily buy the 2 biggest bottles. I would say buy the 2 smaller bottles, because then you're not gonna end up with it languishing in your collection for too long opened, because then the oxygen can get to it, then it starts to degrade. So yeah, if it's financially an option for you, definitely buy backups and keep them sealed in the dark, somewhere cool. And then in a year's time, when that gem, it has been reformulated, you're going to feel very, very smug about the fact you've got a backup bottle. And when you've kept it sealed and dark and cool, you're going to feel very smug about the fact that it smells perfectly crisp when you get it out to spray it for the first time.
Right.
So yeah.
So we've talked a bit about buying. Should we move on to applying?
Definitely, yeah. And I know this is a topic that you're particularly passionate about, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Oh man, it is. It is. But I want you to go first so that I don't feel like I'm taking over.
So applying, I've seen this thing doing the rounds recently, which makes me shudder a little bit. And you know, of course, you can do with perfume whatever you want. It's your perfume. You've bought it. You've earned it. But when I see people, they do the spray into the air, not on them, they spray into the air and then they walk through it. My best friend does this, and I'm just like, I can't look at you when you're doing that. So yeah, spray a cloud, walk through the cloud, and then the fragrance molecules will settle on you in a more diffuse way than if you apply it to your pulse points, which is the more traditional way of applying it. To me, that is just you wasting so much perfume, because you'll spray this big cloud, you'll walk through it, you'll maybe get 30% of it on you. The rest of it will make your room smell very nice, or wherever you're applying it smell very nice.
Have a carpet, good luck.
Yeah, yeah. But you're just wasting it. And to me, it's a precious thing. And so I like to apply it to skin, to pulse points, so that I'm not wasting a load of it on my carpet and my curtains and whatever else, happens to be in the room in which I'm putting perfume on. So yeah, so rule of thumb, wrists, neck, some people do front of the chest, some people do back of the neck, all that's fairly acceptable. Then there's the do you rub, do you not rub? I've heard people say don't rub because it crushes the perfume molecules, which is nonsense. The only reason to not rub is that in rubbing you cause friction, and friction heats up the skin. It makes the top notes evaporate faster. But it is something that people get on their high horses about. Is the average person going to be able to tell whether they've dabbed their wrists together or rubbed their wrists together? I don't think they are. So I think if you want to rub it, it's not right, but it's also a lot less offensive to me than spraying a cloud and walking through it. And you're wasting less perfume that way too. So yeah, technically you are potentially going to get rid of the top notes faster. If that's a part of the perfume that you particularly love, then don't rub. Definitely don't rub. But if you're not bothered, it's not going to kill the perfume. It's certainly not going to crush the molecules, because that's a crazy answer. But you just might get a slightly different experience of it. However, I'm not sure the average person will notice, unless you're really, really into that specific scent and you're paying lots and lots of attention to it. I'm not sure that the average nose would be able to kind of discern that. So yeah, what I tend to do is if it's something like an oil, I will put it on one wrist and then I'll gently press my other wrist into it to distribute it on both. But if you can, on both wrists is probably better, and then allow it to settle before you go for the smell. But Adam, I really need to ask, how many sprays should people wear?
Okay. So I'm passionate about this topic. My mother has lung issues, right? And so I am acutely aware of the effect that an environment can have on somebody's breathing. Now, right off the bat, I'm sure somebody listening or watching this might be thinking, oh, you're one of those people who, if you were a boss at an office, you would tell people not to wear a fragrance to the office anymore. And I'm not. But that example is also worth commenting on, because I feel like this happens a lot. So let me give an opinion on that really quick, just because I think this situation, we've seen so many forum posts and things like that about, well, what do I do if I get approached by my manager at an office who says that I'm wearing too much fragrance? The answer is you shouldn't have worn that much to begin with. This should be, in my opinion, common sense. If you're going out in public in places where you're close enough to people where they are probably going to smell you if you spray several times, again, there's no law, and I'm not saying that some mystical fragrance police should come down from the sky and smite you if you wear 7 sprays too many. But I will say, it's, again, just think about being a decent person, right? Think about if you would hold the door for somebody, if you would say hi to your neighbor walking out, if you would do any little thing just to make somebody else's day a little bit easier, then why would you not just hold back a little bit? Just a little bit. I'm not saying you should only spray one tiny little half spray, under 3 layers of clothing. I'm just saying that, be reasonable. And if you're going to an office, and if you're going to places that are a little like a party or something where you're in contact with many different people, it's probably best to be conservative with sprays. And you would think that that would be such a common sense point. You would think that I wouldn't feel the need to say that, but you'd be terribly wrong. you know,
Yeah.
at least in the United States. I know that there are other cultures where perfume wearing is like a way of life, right? And if you come from a country where, you know, many people out on the street on any given day are wearing a ton of fragrance, I'm not here to talk about your culture. That's your culture. But in the United States, and I'm guessing in the UK, people probably don't like it when they
Mm.
can smell you from across the room.
Yeah,
So,
it's courtesy, isn't it? It's about being courteous to people, and I think it's particularly important when you're in a situation where the people can't get away. So, like the office, you know, your co-workers don't have any option but to sit at their desks. You know, they can't, and quite often they can't open a window even. You know, if you're in one of these modern hermetically sealed buildings, so it's not courteous to, you wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't go and spread your papers all over their desk, so why would you spread your smell all over their desk as well? You know, it's just about kind of, I mean, if you hate your co-workers, fair enough, go mad, but if you want a good working relationship with them, perhaps it is more courteous to not choke them out with 57 sprays of you know, vintage poison or something like that that is really going to get people's backs up. And, you know, I think there's also a thing about, it's actually going to be easier for you, you know, in your working day, if everybody doesn't hate you because you've choked them out with your scent, it's probably going to be better for you in the long run. Like I say,
and
unless you hate your co-workers.
and it's also from a purely selfish perspective, it still behooves you to find, and this is going to change for every fragrance you have, right? Some fragrances are more potent in sillage than others, and everybody has slightly different skin chemistry. Everybody wears slightly different materials in their clothing, so you know all of these are small but important factors in terms of how a fragrance might last or perform. So consider that you need to understand what your fragrance is like before you wear it around a lot of people. If you just got a new bottle of something, maybe the first time you wear it should be like on a Sunday when you're spending most of the day at home. Maybe that's something just to keep in mind. It's not like you have to do that every time, but I feel like it's the most considerate and hopefully the most enjoyable way to enjoy something. Um, with all this being said, if you're going out in public, this does not apply if you're just spending most of the day at home or if you're going to like an open field or something. Uh, I think if you're going to a, you know, like a sealed up office like that, like you said, there's no reason to ever spray more than 4 sprays. I'm sorry. I know. And that's a bold statement. I stand by that number just because I feel like there are some people for whom fragrance seems to just explode off of them no matter what fragrance they're wearing, you know? And there are some people for whom, you know, they report not having a lot of sillage. I do get a little suspicious because I used to think I was one of those people, and I've learned that I was wrong for reasons I'll get into a little bit later. But suffice it to say, what little we know about quote unquote skin chemistry and what little we know about how different materials behave on different clothing, um, I would say it's generally a safe bet to say that 4 sprays at most will work for most people. And what I mean by work is you'll be able to smell it yourself without throwing it across the room, without throwing it to the next cubicle. That might change if it's a perfume like the one I'm wearing today. I'm wearing Love and Crime by Exodolo, something that I really only can personally, from a selfish perspective, I can only stand about half a spray of it before it gets a little overwhelming. So there are fragrances that you should know before you spray to go out in public. And I would say if you just need a number to go by, try to start with like 2 and work your way up from there. You know, start with a very low number and go up from there. Now, I do have some things to say about where to put fragrance, but before we go into that whole, that's another topic in and of itself. I feel like you have something to say, or maybe you don't.
No, I think I'm very much in agreement with you there, because I think so I'm going to tell you an anecdote about my old boss, who was horrible. This one was horrible.
I knew you'd have a work anecdote. I just knew it.
Yeah. And she used to overspray Chanel Sean So Fresh and come and stand too close to me wearing this perfume that she insisted that I should get a bottle of because I liked fresh perfumes. And she always had a slightly hot tunerish smell about her as well. So she, if you imagine, Roald Dahl's The Twits, she sort of reminded me of some, like a caricature of that ilk. Like she was a really mean-spirited and horrible boss. And yeah, she would come and stand far too close to me and tell me that everything I was doing was terrible and wrong and that I should, burn in hell for being such a bad employee. Smelling of Chanel Sean So Fresh with this tunerish undertone. And it got to the point where years after I left that job, if I smell, even now, if I smell that perfume in a crowd, I kind of go, oh, where is she? And yeah, you just don't want to be that person. You just don't want to be that person that is remembered for their potent stench.
Right. Right. Yeah. You don't want to be that person. And indeed, that's a great way to describe it. It's just about, I know that sometimes people wear fragrance for a bit of an image thing. They like compliments. They like to attract people. That's its own discussion that we probably don't have to touch on today. But suffice it to say, 9 times out of 10, it's not like you're going to impress somebody if you're choking them out in a space that's as big as an office and not just a tiny room. So maybe that's all there is to say about spray count, but applying perfume warrants, I think, a little discussion too. You said wrists earlier, and I wanted to briefly touch on spraying on the wrists because to me, I think it's only good to spray on the wrists if you're sampling something, because if it's something you're just trying for like the first or second time and you just want to get to know it, and maybe you're at home, maybe you're elsewhere, but you're kind of like giving it a bit of extra attention because you're trying to get to know it a little bit. Maybe wrist is fine, right? Because you get to wash it off if you hate it, and that's easy to do. Whereas if you spray on your neck or your chest or something, it's harder to remove that fragrance. So I would say wrists are especially good for sampling and trying something out really quick. But my feeling on it is that if you're just wearing fragrance to wear it and to enjoy it, something you have treasured a sample or a bottle of and you just want to wear it, I would advise the mid to upper chest. And I say that because if you spray something on your wrists, I think oftentimes what we don't realize is just how much we move our arms throughout the day, mostly. Sometimes we'll just do something like this where we don't even know that we're doing it. And look how close my nose is to my wrist when I do this, right? Look how close my nose is to my wrist when I adjust my glasses or even if my wrist isn't necessarily close to my nose, what if I'm like waving to somebody? What if I'm like reaching for something really quick? What if I'm just driving, like little movements it sounds ridiculous, but little movements that you make after you've applied a fragrance to the wrist, anytime you move your hands, you move your wrists, you risk exposing that scent to your nose again. And I say it like that because it is sort of a risk. When you have constant exposure to a smell, your brain that that interprets what your nose communicates to it is going to kind of be overwhelmed a little bit. The sense of smell in humans isn't necessarily a perfect thing. We can go anosmic to something where we can't smell it after a while. It's something that we throw around a lot as a word in the community, but we might not always realize how prevalent and serious of an issue it is. If you want to enjoy something, I think you'd be better off putting the perfume itself in a more stationary place, because the distance between my nose and my upper to mid chest isn't going to change much throughout the day. It's only going to change if I like really go like that. Whereas with arms, you're moving your arms around a lot mostly throughout the day without even realizing it sometimes. And I think that if you're going to give yourself a chance to smell it, you may as well give yourself a chance to smell it consistently and in a controlled way, and in a way that's not going to burn your nose out if you make the mistake that I sometimes do admittedly make of applying one too many sprays. I don't like to be an over sprayer, but sometimes it happens by accident. So this is another way to mitigate that.
Yeah, I don't like to be an oversprayer either. In fact, I consider myself a bit of an undersprayer, if anything, because I'd rather not, impinge on other people. I like wrists, sort of conversely, because exactly for the reasons that you mentioned, not the anosmia and the burnout, because I find that doesn't happen to me so much. But I like, because I'll sit and I'll be writing and I'll be sat like that, and I'm getting that proximity, and I find that really a pleasant thing. But I think it's actually the idea that you go anosmic to scents is probably really important to touch on as well, because we hear people say this a lot, like, oh, I've sprayed 10 sprays of Baccarat Rouge and I can't smell it now. I think there's something wrong with my bottle. And actually, exactly like you say, your brain eventually can eventually tune it out. And there are certain perfumes which seem to be a little bit more prone to doing that. I've got no hard data to back this up, but if you look anecdotally within the community, Baccarat Rouge is one that people stop being able to smell sometimes. Not everybody, but it's known for how powerful its sillage is. And people are there going, look, I just keep applying more and more and more because I can't smell it. And all that's happening is that your brain is associating it with being something that is not harmful, because your senses are there to help detect danger to some degree. So your brain's going, that isn't harmful. We don't need to pay attention to it. Forget about it. Look for things that are harmful. So if you're finding that that's happening to you a lot, one of the things that you can do is try and find a perfume that has a smoky note, because your brain is much less likely to tune that out, because smoke equates to fire, fire equates to danger, it equates to warmth, it equates to food. So you're tricking your lizard brain into hypervigilance in a way, in a helpful way. And so if you find that you go anosmic to scents a lot, look for something that's got a smoky note, because your brain will find it much, much harder to tune that out, and you're more likely to be able to smell it for longer. So
that's a great idea. Yeah, I'm a big fan of using common sense and science and just like ways to make the fragrance experimenting process consistent, because then you don't have as many variables to say, well, am I anosmic to something? Does my skin eat it up? We'll hear that kind of thing a lot. That's a great idea, Nicola. It's important to kind of test your nose a little bit over time. I think maybe the reason why this is such an interesting topic to me is because I see a lot of, like you said, Nicola, people may be saying that they've worried that they're gone anosmic to something. But I think the thing that bothers me is that oftentimes you'll see people commenting that that's the fault of the fragrance or the person who created the fragrance. And I actually don't think that's true most of the time. I think most of the time people either maybe put a little too much on for them, for what their nose can do and how their nose behaves in terms of anosmia, or how their skin projects at that kind of thing. And they might not be aware that they're doing that. That's what my concern is anyway. Just because I feel like at this point, there are so many fragrances on the market and so many well-trained, well thought out perfumes that have been made, and well-trained perfumers that are making them, that at this point, it seems to me likely that there's a certain degree of, I hate to use the word user error, but user error among people like making these claims about what a fragrance is or isn't doing. There are too many variables to measure yourself against. So I think using that like little test for yourself, whether it's the smoky fragrance test, whether it's spraying the smallest amount possible on both skin and clothes to see if that affects how you're able to smell it. things like this can kind of keep your brain and your opinions about fragrance sort of in check, you know?
Yeah. And I think other things you can also do are, if you think you've gone anosmic to a fragrance, rest it for at least a month. Don't wear it at all. Don't wear fragrance at all, you know, so you're not confusing your brain. And obviously we're talking about the anosmia that comes from over smelling something. We're not talking about the anosmia that comes from, you know, as a result of some sort of post-viral syndrome that could come as a result of COVID or could come as a result of a traumatic head injury. I think that they're a totally different kettle of fish that you would need to seek specialist advice for. We're talking about the anosmia from over smelling a scent, so your brain tunes it out with no underlying kind of medical reason. So yeah, you can rest the fragrance and rest your nose by not wearing any scents for a while. Also, if you're wearing it and you think, well, I can't smell it anymore, ask somebody that is new, like, as in, like, don't ask your partner who's been around you all day, or you know, your friend that you live with or whatever. Ask somebody who is newly coming into your environment and newly coming into your personal space, can you smell this? And if they can, the problem is likely to be that you're just tuning it out. And so then, you know, that's a good point at which you kind of think, well, actually, you know, maybe I should rest this fragrance for a little while. And if you rest it for a month or so, when you come back to it, hopefully your brain has stopped tuning it out and you'll feel, you know, able to detect it again. And another interesting thing that I learned visiting a perfume exhibition a couple of years ago is that not everybody can smell ISOE Super because it's quite a large molecule. So the thinking is that some people's receptors just get overloaded by it straight away, and so the signal from the receptor to the brain just doesn't fire. And that can be a problem if you're wearing scents. You know, I think it's something like 90% of all modern fragrance has ISOE Super in. It's a very high percentage anyway. And so if you're one of those people, you're possibly not getting some of the heft and diffusion and just general potency of the scent that everybody else around you is getting. And it can be quite discombobulating if you're thinking, well, I can't smell that, but everybody else is going, you know, they've put a bit much on today. So just bear in mind that that's a thing that can happen as well. And, you know, you might want to contemplate whether that's something that's affecting you. I have a friend that can't smell ISOE Super, and I have tested her numerous times, and she just can't smell it. She says it just smells that there's nothing there. That, you know, I'll soak a cotton wool pad and say, "Can you smell that?" She's like, "No, don't get it." So, and I feel sorry for those people because I really like the smell of ISOE Super.
It is kind of nice. I will say, the interesting thing about ISOE Super is that it doesn't always need to be smelled. The cool thing about it is that it helps throw other materials out there. It is a large molecule, and it also behaves in this like excitable way where it has more projection than many molecules do, and it helps to kind of carry the weight of other materials that are that don't behave as excitedly and don't evaporate off the skin in such a extreme way. And so the cool thing about it is that even if you don't smell it, you know, we should all appreciate it. You know, we should all say thank you. Materials like ISOE Super that are very, they have just great sillage because they help to alter the behavior of other materials that we love. You know, natural materials or synthetics included. I will say that's just a quick little tip for those who are really interested in learning about what they're smelling. If that's really interesting to you, you can get like a little 4 milliliter vial of ISOE Super Pure for like $2 or $3 from places like Perfumer's Apprentice. You know, you could having a little battle
rumble going on in the background.
Yeah, entertainment in more ways than one on these Fragrantica talks. So yeah, I would highly advise people just to buy little perfume making kits. You don't need to be interested in perfume making to actually buy them, you know, and they help you understand what you are smelling in many of today's fragrances. You might recognize something and it might make you think a little differently about that thing. So it's really fun. It's a really cool way to learn more about how different materials work and why you're smelling certain things at any given time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it really opens your eyes, doesn't it, to how fragrances are behaving and constructed when you smell the materials that have gone into them. It's so interesting. And I think for the people who say things like, oh, I can't really detect the individual notes, exposing yourself to some of the individual notes can really help you start to pick them out a little bit more. Yeah, it's a really good thing to do.
Now that you bring that up, this is another related topic to this. That reminds me. So this is especially useful, I think, for people who are more at the start of their, to use a YouTuber term, fragrance journey. So there's a difference between notes, accords, and materials, right?
Yeah.
And this is just something just to keep in mind. I think we tend to simplify what a fragrance actually is and what it's made out of and how it works, just because it's a very complicated thing. And making a perfume is very, very difficult, you know? So perfume houses, not wanting to scare people away with very technical, like kind of strange sounding terms and material names, will simplify it, and they'll write, you know, their list of notes, and whether they're putting it in terms of top, middle, and base notes, or whether they're just listing things, they're kind of simplifying it so that people can kind of understand what they might expect. The thing that I will say is that just because something has something listed in the notes doesn't mean that that material went into the perfume. And then that probably is something many people know by now, let's hope. But if it isn't, if you didn't know that, that's fine. It's just sort of something to keep in mind. Another way to break that down one step further, just because an accord is listed doesn't mean that that accord was actually put in there. That's going to sound strange, but hear me out. Most of the time when these accords are listed or these notes are listed in a pyramid, it's because the house that's releasing it, they're smelling what has been created already, and they're saying, okay, this is what it reminds me of. They're not necessarily always, and some of them do, some of them don't. They don't always necessarily like give the perfumer a brief that says, I want raspberries, I want oak moss, I want this, that, and the other thing. Sometimes they're just giving them a feeling, kind of a brief, like I want it to smell like this and provide this kind of a feeling. And the perfumer will then interpret that and create something that is then analyzed later, and that's where they get the notes. So again, this is a very basic thing. I think most people who are watching this video probably know this already, but just don't make the mistake of assuming that, you know, I'm experiencing this wrong because I don't smell the raspberry. You know, you're not. It's just the perfumer used materials that to some people will smell of raspberries.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point to make. And I actually don't think as many people as we imagine realize that the notes lists are often entirely made up. You know, they are often entirely made up, and none of those materials are in that perfume because, you know, as exactly as Adam says, it's, you know, they give it to a focus group and say, what do you think this smells of? And 5 out of the 10 people in that focus group will say, oh, it smells of honeysuckle, when actually that floral accord might have been made up of things that have got nothing to do with flowers. You know, it might be made entirely of synthetics, it might be made entirely of different flowers, and that's often because they're trying to simplify it. It's also because not everything can be made into a perfumery ingredient, and if it is made into if it is capable of going through distillation to smell something, you know, to turn into something which smells, quite often it doesn't smell like you imagine. So if you were able to distill sweet peas, for example, the resulting material that you would get may bear no resemblance to the sweet pea flower that you smell in your garden. And that's quite shocking, you know, when you first smell the actual essences, and you think, well, I have in my mind this idea of what vanilla smells like, and then you smell the material vanilla, and it doesn't smell like you think it would. It's much more complex and much more woody, and much more rich than it ends up being in the perfume. And vanilla's, possibly a bad example, because at least they're kind of kissing cousins. There's certain things that the flower that it comes from, or the wood that it comes from, and the resulting material that goes in your perfume smells so differently that you wouldn't believe me if I said you were actually smelling X, Y, or Z. You'd think, well, it smells really swampy, or it smells really strange. But then when when it's diluted, when it's put with other materials, when it is allowed space within the composition, it turns back, or it certainly turns into something that is usable and will form part of a greater whole. I think it's hard to navigate that at first, because people will bamboozle you with accords and notes, and how do you know whether something's a note or an accord? Because it's not always that obvious. And is it vanilla that I'm smelling, or is it an accord of vanilla? It's very difficult to navigate that. So really, is it best to avoid it? Is it best to not worry? I think maybe rather than avoid it, just don't worry about it too much. If you're not getting something, that's only because the focus group got it. It doesn't mean it was in there. I suppose ouds are really actually quite a good example, because so many fragrances say they contain oud, and you smell them and you think, I can't smell any oud in this, because it's either there and it's in such a small concentration that it's barely detectable, or it's not there. They've made an oud accord using other things. And they are allowed to say that it's got, as a note, they can still list oud even if it hasn't got any oud in. It's like if you bake a cake and you sell that cake, you have to list all the ingredients. You don't have to do that with perfumery. You have to list the allergens, but you don't have to list the individual ingredients. So it might contain oud, it might not, and the only way to tell whether it contains a sort of satisfactory dose of oud, whether that's an accord or whether it's the real thing, is by smelling it and thinking, am I happy with that? Does it make me happy? And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, move on to the next one.
Absolutely. So we have discussed buying fragrance. We've discussed applying it and wearing it. I'm curious to know your thoughts on storage and choosing scents to wear. I think we touched a little bit on storage at the beginning, but I'm curious to know if you have anything else to add.
No, not really. I don't think so. Dark and cool. Dark and cool. Keep your fragrances away from the light, and they will last you for much longer. I think it's really probably no more complicated than that. Choosing appropriate fragrances for appropriate occasions is much harder, and it's something that I get asked a lot, actually, is what fragrance should I wear to my wedding? What fragrance should I wear to my relative's funeral? And the advice I give people, wedding's an easy one, in that what I always say to people is buy something new, test it, but buy something new, and don't wear it between the point that you've bought it and your wedding day. Don't wear it. Then on your wedding day, spray it liberally, because if there is any day that you can, get away with overspraying and choking people out, it's your wedding day.
You can do whatever you want on your wedding day.
Yeah, do whatever you want. Spray it liberally, and then you forever, when you smell that perfume, will be reminded of that day, and you'll get the sort of the rush of happy memories coming back. That really, really works. I did a perfume matching for one of my dearest friends before her wedding, and we picked two. We picked one for a wedding day, one for a honeymoon, and now she'll occasionally bounce into the room smelling great, and I'll be like, what are you wearing? And she's like, oh, it's my honeymoon perfume, or it's my wedding. She saves her wedding perfume for really special occasions. Honeymoon perfume is slightly more every day, but she wears it whenever she needs a bit of a lift. And in her mind, they're the happy memories and the scent are bound together now. And so that's a great way of really cementing joy and being able to bring it into your everyday life. People sometimes ask me about more somber occasions like funerals, and I've gone backwards and forwards on this quite a lot. I often will say to people, it really depends. So if it's the sort of event or somber occasion like a funeral where you feel like you need some comfort, don't buy a new perfume. Get something in your collection that is well worn so that you've got enough other good memories to balance out the somber one that you're about to subject it to, that you find comforting. And if wearing some scent that is comforting will help you get through that day, then do it. The danger is if you buy something new, like if you buy something new and it's tied to your wedding day, if you wear it new for a funeral, it will be forever associated with a really sad time and you won't be able to get away from it. So I sometimes have worn comforting scents to funerals. More recently, I've been going without scent because I haven't wanted to sort of pick something from my collection that I was willing to risk tying a sad memory to. So that's my advice on that. Do you have any thoughts on specific occasions and picking scents for them?
Not different from what you would say. I will say I'm getting married later this year, so I'm going to take your advice. Absolutely. It's not like I need to buy anything else, but I like your strategy there. That's something that I kind of want to try and report back on how well it works. But so maybe piggybacking then off of what you were saying about a funeral. I think my advice, if I were asked without thinking, my advice would probably be just don't wear something, maybe just don't, for the same reasons that you talk about wearing something to a wedding. You have that memory association. Then again, I really liked the way you answered that question about, wearing something to a funeral that comforts you, as long as that fragrance that you're wearing has other more positive memories associated with it. It should balance it out pretty well. And I think that's a very thoughtful thing to say, Nicola. Really, that would be probably what I'll say to anybody who asks me that question in the future. But I will maybe put a caveat in there, is that if you're a person, and this goes for any occasion, wedding, funeral, or anything completely in between, if you're a person who might get a little anxious about, oh, well, I want to wear this to my, cousin's bar mitzvah. Do I want to associate it with that event from now on? Maybe then the idea is either don't wear something, or to your earlier point about funerals, wear something that you're very, very familiar with and you've worn to tons of other things. Go for the old standby. The thing that I think they refer to it as in the community is dumb reach, right? That's the term. Go for the dumb reach, because it's always been there for you and it likely will continue to be. When we say like, be careful because you might associate something in your memory, I think that's very true. But I know that I sometimes get a little bit of analysis paralysis about what I'm going to wear on a particular day. That's also partly because I write for Fragrantica, so I spend a lot of time smelling many different things, and I rarely get the opportunity to just completely wear what I want to out of my own collection. So, there are reasons why I experience that paralysis, if you will. Oftentimes, what I end up reaching for on any given day is just something I know I like, something I know I really like and can wear to many different things comfortably. All that said, I'm not really a person who puts a ton of thought generally into like, is this appropriate? Because, bouncing off of our earlier part of the conversation, I don't tend to overspray. So I'm not typically very worried about what anybody around me is thinking about me, because I don't tend to spray enough such that people across the room or even people a couple of feet away from me can smell me. Typically I wear just enough to be able to smell it on myself. And that's usually good for me. So it depends on what type of person you are, depends on your relative anxiety over what you're going to wear on a particular day. And if you're a person who's more anxious, then go for the dumb reach. And if you're a person who just wants to think about it and be thoughtful, and you have the time and the mental patience to be thoughtful about it, then follow Nicola's advice. Absolutely.
It's interesting actually. The way I pick a fragrance in the morning to wear is, you're absolutely right. You know, doing what we do, a lot of days I'll have um I'll be wearing something because I'm testing it, or I'm writing notes for a review, or I'm evaluating something. So I'll, you know, sometimes have one on one wrist, something on another wrist. But days when I do get to wear things from my collection, what I do is I go and look at my collection, and I think, oh, maybe that one. I sniff the neck of it, and almost instantly I'll be able to tell whether that's the right perfume for my mood that day. And I think it's, you know, kind of a combination of factors of the weather and what I'm doing, but also I'll smell it and go, no, it's not that one today. And then I'll pick another one up and sniff that and be like, yeah, that's the one. And it's almost like a real reflexive almost response. I you know, some fragrance companies and fragrance brands talk about the scent giving you something that you need, and sometimes it does feel genuinely like I sniff something and it might be a favorite, but it's not the right fit for that day, so I put it down and pass it over to something else, and sniff that and go, yeah, that's the one, and on we go with the day. So some days I don't even really know what I'm going to pick, and I think it might be, you know, that perfume, and I smell it and I think, no, actually it's that other one. So sometimes we surprise ourselves.
And I will say the advice for choosing fragrances only, what we are saying only becomes more relevant and more meaningful to you if maybe you followed our earlier advice about buying slow, right? Because
Mm.
I think many people in this community get to a point where they have so many bottles at, at a given point that they are bound to experience some amount of analysis paralysis. Maybe they have to start forcing themselves to do weekly rotations where the week before they'll choose what they're going to wear the upcoming few days, and they just stick to that. They commit to that, and that's sort of a fun thing to do, even if you only have a few, like 10 bottles, right? There are people out there who have a ton of fragrances. I have more than I probably could go through in my lifetime. I know many of us are guilty of that, but when you get to that point, you're more likely to experience this kind of difficulty choosing. So it bears repeating that slow buying is beneficial.
Mm. Yeah, and I think there was a really great article on Fragrantica, I think last year or the year before, about how addictive it can be and how actually that can cause significant financial difficulties for people. And it's a really great read if you want to go back and find that article, or if you feel yourself that you might be affected by a kind of, you know, I hate to call it an addiction, but that kind of that addiction to fragrance buying. It's a real problem. So let's, you know, if we're talking to new people into the community, let's try and avoid that right from the start and advocate a slow buy if at all possible. Slow, thoughtful, you know, considered purchases are going to bring you a lot of happiness. And if that means you have 5 bottles or 2 bottles or 1 bottle, don't matter. As long as it's making you happy and as long as you're getting some joy out of it, that's the absolute main thing.
This isn't going to be relevant maybe to everybody, depending on their relative social comfort. Um, I will say there's a sort of a double-edged sword of like talking about your excitement about things that you've bought or things that you've tried even, because there is sort of like a culture of overspraying and a culture of overbuying. Um, there is something that's sort of excessive about this community that isn't always the most savory part of it, if we're being honest. But then there are also many people who really just genuinely love what they do. And I make the case that if we're going to give most people the benefit of the doubt, I'm sure most people who are involved in the community earnestly really like being a part of it and really like discovering new fragrances and talking about it. So don't be afraid to socialize in healthy doses with those who are like-minded, because then if you can talk to them about things that you both already own, if you can find people to chat with, it kind of puts things in perspective in certain ways. Somebody might have less than you, somebody might have much more than you, and either situation can help put your own situation in perspective. And you can get a little bit more of that excitement and that kind of that you can kind of stave off some of those feelings of I need this by taking out some of that excitement in conversations with like-minded folks, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Being social is sort of a double-edged sword, because sometimes part of the community advises maybe not so smart behavior. But if you find people who you are comfortable with and, have great chat with, then that can also be a benefit too. So my advice there, I think the point that I'm making is just, it's good to reach out to those who you feel comfortable reaching out to and starting conversations.
Definitely. And to the people who are new to the community, you are coming into one of the most friendly, happiest places on the internet. I'm not saying it's exclusively happy. I'm not saying that people don't get on their high horses and get very upset about certain things. But on the whole, the fragrance community is so supportive, so friendly, and so willing to share. I have had people contact me and say, I'd really love you to review this fragrance, but I'm going to send you a sample. And I'm not talking about brands, I'm talking about just people who love that fragrance. And friends I've made within the community. You and I have swapped samples, but also people that I know in the UK, because, postage is so difficult here. We'll swap samples. I have a friend in London who is incredibly generous and sends me samples, 2 or 3 times a year. This big bag will arrive full of them. And I likewise do the same for her. And what you'll find, hopefully, is that because people are so passionate, they actually just really want you to be excited about the scents that they love as well. And so there is something really delightful about getting a fragrance that you love, saying to your friend, have you smelt this? And then them either saying, oh yeah, I love it, or saying, no, I haven't. And then thinking, actually, I think they might like it, so I'm going to pop them a little sample in the post. And then getting that feedback from them where they're like, oh yeah, I did love it. How thoughtful of you that you sent me that, and how thoughtful of you that you anticipated that would fit within my wheelhouse or not. And that sharing is so lovely. And I did not expect that when I came to the community. I didn't anticipate it at all. And the sheer generosity of people is quite remarkable and quite a lovely thing. And I wish more online communities or digital communities were this nice. So I'm just going to take a little moment to say thank you to everybody that's ever given me a sample. It's brought a little bit of light to my day, and I hope the samples that I probably gave you back did for you as well.
Likewise, that's an important thing to do. I've had so many similar experiences, I can't even count them. And I've met a lot of really great people who I admire through this community. So, I mean, yeah, it's an important thing to give thanks for, and it's an important thing to try to participate in, depending on your comfort level with it, where you can, because I think you can really enjoy it more when you find people who are like-minded and similarly passionate and energetic about it. It makes the experience much better. So, I mean, I hope this was useful. I hope this was helpful to anybody who's a little bit newer to the community, or at least maybe a little entertaining to hear a couple of other folks rattle on about things that you might already be very familiar with, and concepts that you might already be familiar with. I mean, everybody thinks a little differently about this, and it's okay to have different opinions. But at the end of the day, I think if you were to distill much of what we said and much of our opinions down to their most basic elements, it's just be thoughtful, because this hobby is a thoughtful hobby. It's often something that you do kind of alone or introspectively. And, it's important to remember that you have an impact on those around you when you wear fragrance, and you have an impact on yourself when you wear fragrance. And so, just being a thoughtful individual and using this to, communicate an aspect about yourself can be a really, I think is probably one of the most rewarding ways to view the hobby as a whole.
Mm. Yeah, and we'd also love it if you've got any top tips that we might not have covered today, if you leave them in the comments, because we're always learning and we're always really excited to find another tip that we can share with people that we maybe haven't thought about. So please do drop those in the comments for us.